Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Microsoft 365 Lifecycle Management from Provisioning to Archiving. My name is Vlad Catrinescu. I'm Syskit's Technical Evangelist and a Microsoft MVP from Montreal, Canada. Also here with me is Nicolina, who will show you a demo of Syskit Point later on. Now, most of you might already know Syskit as a company, but for those of you who don't, let me briefly introduce you. Syskit is a software development company founded more than 15 years ago. We develop products for Microsoft 365 governance and security, as well as for SharePoint on-prem administration. We currently have more than 3,500 customers around the world, ranging from small businesses to large corporations. And we have several products, including our award-winning SP Docket for SharePoint on-prem, as well as our flagship product, Syskit Point for Microsoft 365 governance and security. Before we start, just a few housekeeping items. All registrants will receive a recording of the webinar within a few days. And after my presentation, Nicolina will give us a short demo of Syskit Point, showing you how you can manage resources from their creation to their end of life. After, we will have a Q&A session where we'll try to answer any questions that you might have. So please use that Q&A function to ask any questions throughout the webinar. On this, let's get started. So what is the plan for today? First of all, we will talk about what is even lifecycle management, and then we will talk about modern provisioning in Microsoft 365 and what happens after a workspace has reached its useful life. Now, for those of you who know me, usually I have a little bit more energy than that, but I just came back from Microsoft Ignite. And, traditionally, Microsoft Ignite has been in sunny destinations like Orlando with palm trees and things like that. While last week, it was in a very sunny Chicago where we had snow during the last few days of Ignite. So looks like I lost my voice a little bit. So I do apologize in advance if I have to take a quick break, take a sip of coffee or something like that. This way you can all hear me properly. So let's start by talking with what is lifecycle management. Lifecycle management is how do we manage a workspace from idea to deletion, from the workspace being created to the workspace being in use to becoming inactive and then eventually deleting it or maybe archiving it for future use. Now, of course, workspace being used, that's a topic for another webinar on how people are using SharePoint, M365, and all that fun stuff. Today, we will really focus on how can we better automate the creation of our workspaces? How can we find out when a workspace is inactive? Because that's usually the toughest problem. And what can we do after? Is deletion the only option, or do we have maybe a bit more options that we can do? And let's start with provisioning. Now, for those of you that are coming from on-prem, it was pretty easy, right? Because we never allowed our users to create sites by themselves. It was always an IT-owned process where people had to create a help desk ticket. IT would eventually get to it. They would have PowerShell scripts or things like that to create sites in the right templates. And nothing was really out of the box. It was just SharePoint. But now we get to Microsoft 365, and Microsoft has enabled self-service for everyone, where every user in the company can just go to the SharePoint homepage, create a new site, and they have a site. Or if they choose a team site, they create a Microsoft 365 group that also creates the exchange email, it creates the planner, the plan in planner, and so on. They can also go to Teams click on new team by default, and they create the Microsoft 365 group. It's super fast, it's super easy for people to do it. But the thing is, how do we stay in control? Because this change made a lot of admins just turn things off. And if there's something that we learned is nobody wins if you have a battle between end user and IT. And IT always kind of want to block people, unfortunately, from creating stuff. So our goal today is how can we achieve balance in powers where the end user remains productive, but IT has all the control they need to stay in charge. So how do we control when required and empower where not? Because good governance is really the balance of productivity and security. So how did a provisioning process, how does your standard provisioning process look? Uh, First of all, of course, we have a form, whether it's a help desk ticket, whether it's a Microsoft form, a list, a Power App. We have a form where a user goes to request a workspace. Then it goes for an approval. And traditionally, we have done approvals for everything inside, for every workspace that we have created. We then either approve or deny the workspace, and then the site gets created. That has been the process that we have followed for years. But what if we make it more flexible? What if we try to improve on that a little bit? Of course, the user will always have to enter the information because the business request will always come from the user. But if you look at it, if a project manager requests a new project site, who is IT to approve or deny that request? It makes no sense. Who knows more about projects? Is it the project manager or is it the IT team? If somebody from HR wants to create a committee or they want to create a community, let's say a runners club or things like that, who is IT to approve or deny that request to say, no, you cannot create a runners club in the organization? It makes no sense to have that approval there all the time. We need some kind of processing logic to say, hey, if it's somebody from the project team requesting a project, just do it right away. But if it's somebody from HR requesting a project, then maybe send the approval to the project team. So that approval doesn't always have to happen, doesn't always have to go to IT because everybody should go to the department that is responsible for that function. Uh, it, IT doesn't have to be a blocker. We then, of course, have our workspaces being created, and after that, we can actually do stuff after creation has been done, whether it's adding artifacts such as uh, libraries, lists, branding, maybe adding the site once it's created, add it to the hub. So if we have a project site, we might have a hub site in SharePoint with all of the different project sites that we want to add it to that hub. So there might be some post-creation processing. So really, the goal is to find out what is important for everyone. For users, they need to know we need to know what is the type of work they're doing. What are their communication needs? Do they need internal access? Do they need to invite guests? How do we find that balance and power between end users being productive and IT having that sandbox that they control the people in where people can be productive, but uh, also they cannot do anything that does harm to the organization? So what are the process? First of all, we need to do some requirement gathering. Of course, we need to understand what are our users actually doing. We then need to transform that into technical documents. So, okay, the user has this requirement. Do they only need a SharePoint site or do they need a Microsoft 365 group? We'll then need to figure out what is the user entry point. Is it a list? Is it a help desk ticket in ServiceNow? Where will the user do that request? And then how do we automate it? If we take a look at some of the tools, what can we do? So we've already talked a bit for requirements gathering. Why do we need this? What are the goals of this workspace? Something that many people forget to do is, okay, we did the request, people enter the metadata, but 1 year for now, how do we match that metadata that the user entered with the actual site? One way is to actually add the metadata in the site property bag. Now, you cannot do this in the UI. This is something that you have to do with PowerShell or with code. This way, if you create your own reporting, you can actually see what was all the information that was entered when the site was created, the project code, the expiration date. Do people need external access or not? If yes, maybe we'll do an approval. After that, what kind of, for the technical understanding, what kind of workspace do people need? Again, it might be an SDS3, just a SharePoint site, or it might be a full M365 group, or maybe they just need a Viva Engage community. After that, where will users make the request? We've already talked about that. And the technical tooling, what are we going to use? There are so many options that we'll talk about in just a second. During the requirement gathering phase, one of the most important things you'll need to do is to identify the types of sites. For example, did a quick, one of my recent projects, they had 5 different types of site: project management, a document repository, a communication site, a team collaboration site, and a partner collaboration. So those were the user needs. And then you document. Okay, so for project management, it's a Microsoft 365 group. It will create a set list of lists and web parts because we want each one of our projects to have an issues list, a milestone list, a key documents library. So you have to note all of that down. For a document repository, again, I love Microsoft 365 groups, but why create all those artifacts when you just need a document repository? You can create a modern standalone team site, an SDS3 team site, and so on. So you go through each one of those requests and then you try to map them to technology. After that, you need to decide what type of information do we need for each site. Now, all of your sites might have a base metadata that you want to add on all of them. So things such as title, description, location. If you're a multinational company, you might want to know what country is owning this, or for what location was it meant to be. And of course, a secondary owner. You don't want to have only one owner for your site. But for some of them, you might want to request some extra information. And the worst thing that you can do is whenever a user requests a site, you have 10,000 fields for them to enter. And sometimes if you don't add logic to your form, people just want a team collaboration site and you ask them for the project sponsor. Makes no sense. So you need to find a UI that is flexible enough for you to add that logic of, depending on the type of site, we will show them different fields. So for project management, for example, some extra metadata you can ask are is the cost center, the project sponsor, and the project end date. For the communication site, do you want it to be private to only a group of people, or do you want it to be open to all the enterprise? For partner collaboration, you might want to ask, okay, who are you collaborating with in this site? This way, part of the automation, you can go and allow only that domain for that site. This way, that site is more secure. You have external sharing on, However, it's only with a specific domain that has been entered when the request has been made. And you have the partner company documented there as well. This way you have all the information you need to approve it. Then you need to build out the templates. Uh, First, identify what users need. So really, we did that, identify what IT needs. A good example for that was, okay, we'll allow external sharing, but you need to give us one or two domains, and we're going to lock external sharing to that domain. After that, what I like to do for templating is let the users build it in SharePoint. Give them a blank team site or give them a blank communication site and tell them, hey, project manager, what does your perfect project site look like? A mistake that many people made, they already go to PowerShell, they already go to PnP templates, they already go to site designs, and they try to create everything via code from the start. But the thing is, users will not like what you give them the first time. There's chances that they'll want to make a lot of changes. So if you start from code, updating that template can become more difficult. But if you start from out of the box, they really have a chance to go in, create it, try to add some sample content, and then before you transform it to code, it will be a lot closer. And the last part, which is really important, let people test them before finalizing them. I don't know about you, but it happens to me all the time. I think I want something, I think I know exactly the way I want it, how I want to do it, and then I use it for the first time, and I'm like, yeah, actually, there's a few things that we need to do a bit differently. So, you know what? For the first project site, create it manually. Let them run a quick test project with it. For the first communication site, let them try and use it before you finalize them in code. And after that, you'll be able to use them as your master template site. So try to keep an empty one in there that is built right the way you want it. This way, if ever you want to make a change to the template, you'll be able to go change it in that master site or main site and then re-export it inside for all the future site creations. Now, we will need to build a user request system. Make sure you find a tool that is accessible to everybody. Licensing is a big thing here because a lot of times, let's say you want to use Power Apps, but the connector you'll want to connect it maybe with ServiceNow requires premium licensing. So not everybody might have that, or you want to do it in a third-party system, but not everybody has licenses. So make sure you find a tool that is available to everyone and a same tool or a different tool to store the information. You might want to store all the requests in a SharePoint list. Or if you have 50 of them a day, you might actually surpass what a SharePoint list can do. Put them in a Dataverse table or choose where you will store all that information for reporting in the future. And make sure that you choose a tool that supports extensibility. This way in the future, if ever you need to uh, extend it, to modify it, you'll be able to. And of course, something that is easy for users. You don't want to have something that is super complicated that people will give up trying to use. Find something that has a beautiful UI and a beautiful user experience. Now for provisioning, what can we use? Actual tools now. For the template creation, we can use site templates and site designs. This is a Microsoft provided option, supported. It does have some limitations, but it's something that is pretty easy to capture an existing site and then reapply it. You can also use PnP PowerShell. Now, that's kind of every admin's favorite PowerShell module. It allows you to create templates directly from a site as well. It is an open source repository, so it's not fully supported by Microsoft, but it has an amazing community support. For the forms and requests, you can use Power Apps. You can use a Teams chatbot if you want, or sorry, an agent, as we call them now. You can use a SharePoint list. You can use Microsoft Forms. Really depends up to you. You can even have maybe a form in a third-party system like ServiceNow if you already have a lot of forms in there. For the business process, we want to automate as much of it as possible. Power Automate and Logic Apps are two really good examples in the Microsoft ecosystem that we can use to automate it. Of course, you might need to run some PowerShell at some point, and this is where Azure Functions and Azure Automation can come in as available tools for you. So you can start in Power Automate for Logic Apps, and then when it's time to actually create the site and apply the template, call in a runbook in Azure Automation and have the runbook run the PowerShell. And from an administration and reporting point of view, we of course have, you can put stuff in SharePoint or Dataverse again as examples. And if you want to have reporting on it, you can always do Power BI. And it's really important to do some reporting and really understand who are the people requesting it? What is our most popular template? If you do internal billing, what country or what department did the most request? It's important for you to have that log of requests. What was approved? What was not approved? And go from there. Now let's talk about templates for a bit. So what you can do out of the box, and I'm sure a lot of you have seen it. Whenever you create a SharePoint site, you have the option to choose a template from Microsoft or from your organization. Those are called SharePoint site templates. Microsoft gives you some options. So you'll have like the project management side, the department side, the training side that Microsoft gives you, but you also have a tab called from your organization. So that's where you can deploy your own site templates. What is really cool with those is that they're added after creation. So it creates the base site, adds the artifacts from the site template, and they are not destructive. We can also have Teams templates. Again, you see old out of the box ones when we create a team in Microsoft Teams, and you see things such as manage a project, manage an event, and you have both Microsoft provided templates in there, as well as you can add your own, and you can manage them with policies in the Teams admin center. So for example, you can say that, hey, only project managers can see the manage a project template. Now, let's deep dive into SharePoint site templates. A SharePoint site template is really a collection of site scripts. Site scripts are all the action inside your template. So add a list, add a library, add this page, and so on, add branding. So you can have a bunch of site scripts inside a site template. A site template can be applied to a site or a subsite. I almost didn't want to mention subsite in there because we're not supposed to use subsites anymore. But you can apply it to a site either from the UI or from PowerShell, and applying the site template will execute all the actions in the site script. You can apply it on site collection creation, manually, wherever you like, or you can even have a site script, a site template that you apply whenever a site joins a hub. Something that is really important to know is that site templates are not attached to sites. They're an action that you do to an existing site. They're not prepackaged sites. They are really a list of actions that you do to an existing site. If you change the site template on a site, it will not update existing sites. So if you change a site template that you have in your organization, it will not update all the different sites that use that site template. the site template is really a list of actions that applies to a new site. You can always go back to existing sites and reapply the site template. Site templates are non-destructive, meaning that if, I'll give an example, you have a project site right now, a site template where you have an issues list. And after that, in your new site template, you remove the issues list, but you add the bugs list. If you apply that new site template on top of an existing site with the same site template applied, that issues list will not get deleted. The new content will be added, but nothing you have in there will be removed, which is awesome because it allows you to keep adding stuff to it without being afraid that content will break. Now let's talk about the PNP PowerShell. Those are based on the PNP provisioning schema. You can find it on GitHub, and you have two types of templates. You have site templates and tenant templates. Tenant templates are newer. What they allow you to do is inside of the same template, not only deploy a SharePoint site, but also deploy stuff in Microsoft Teams. So you want to create a team, you want to add some channels, you want to maybe even add some private channels in there. PNP allows you to have that kind of connected template that is not only SharePoint, but is your whole collaboration workspace. When you save a PNP template, you can either save it as an XML file, which is kind of cool because you can always open it with Notepad++, take a look at what's inside and everything, or as a .pnp file, which is a more compressed type of file and will also combine all your external artifacts in one single file. And the really cool thing, of course, it can handle modern pages. So if you want to save 4 types of pages, maybe you have an about the project page that you want to deploy with every project site, well, PNP can do that. Now, let's talk about automation. What I love to do is use Power Automate and Azure Automation. Again, you can always use logic apps and functions if you're more on the dev side. But if you're an IT pro like me, Power Automate and Azure Automation are the easiest ones to do. Why I love Power Automate? Built-in approvals, so you have that approvals connector, which is awesome. Super easy to send approvals to anybody you need. Integrates with SharePoint, you have that logical branching, and it has easy connectors, whether it's to send emails, write stuff to SharePoint, or run stuff in Azure. Azure Automation actually has the PNP PowerShell module integrated, so it's super easy to deploy, and it also has that credential management that allows you to connect to the tenant in order to deploy your site template, which is great. And also, where do we store that template? You don't want to have it on a local machine. You probably want to have it in Azure Blob somewhere. This way, it's in the cloud, easy for the Azure Runbook to access it. So if we take a look at how your overall technical process can look like, the user requests a site via Power Apps or agent in Teams. You have a flow that is triggered on item creation. You have your processing logic, and depending on the type of site and who requested it, an approval is created. The flow in Power Automate calls the Azure automation job. PNP PowerShell creates the site and applies the templates, and then you have your repository, in this case SharePoint in my idea, being updated with the URL, the owners with everything, and the email sent to the owner. Now, what happens after a workspace becomes inactive? And honestly, that is the bigger problem that people have today. It's easy to create a ton of sites, but what happens when they become inactive? And the bigger problem is even how do we know when a site becomes inactive? We actually have two really cool tools to help us with that by Microsoft. Let me open up here uh, the first one, which is the group expiration. So for Microsoft 365 groups, if you go to Enter ID, you go under groups here on the left and you go to group settings, one of the options you have is your expiration policy. Expiration policy, what it does, basically, let's hope that Azure likes me today. Getting there, I know Microsoft had some outages yesterday, but I did hope that they were fixed by now. There we go. Now it loaded. What it allows you to do is to say, hey, you know what? If a group has been inactive for 180 days, email the owner. And if the owner does not renew the group, well, go ahead and delete it. You can set it to 180, 365, or at least 30 days. That is the minimum that you can send it to. And if ever the group has no more owners, you can always say, hey, you know what? If the group has no more owners, just email it to IT. And I'm in the Vlad Talks Tech tenant here, so email it to it@vladtalkstech.com. And you can even decide, you know what? Don't apply it to all of them, only apply it to selected groups inside your tenant. Um, the downside with group expiration really is that you can only have one single policy for the tenant. So you cannot have a policy for project sites. You cannot have a policy for communication, things like that. It's only for Microsoft 365 groups and only one per tenant. Now, recently, Microsoft, as part of SharePoint Premium Advanced Management, they added a new functionality called Site Lifecycle Management. So on this one here, we actually have an inactive site policy. So if I click on it, I can go create a policy. So what does this policy do? Generate reports of inactive sites. So you have a monthly inactive sites report on sites if they had no visits. So it also looks at the visits, which is cool, edits or file actions, and no activity on any connected resources such as Teams, Viva, Engage, and Exchange within a time period that you set. So even if it's in the SharePoint Admin Center, it doesn't only look at SharePoint, it looks at the full workspace. Then it will send an email every month to owners asking them to review their inactive sites and choose whether to keep them or delete them. And you can also act on sites that are inactive for more than 3 months. So let's go here on next. First of all, I need to decide, okay, how long after the last activity should a site be considered inactive? Let's leave it at 3 months. And the really cool thing here with this new inactive site policy is you're now limited to only one policy. You're limited to, well, you're not limited. That's the fun part. You can create multiple policies. So for example, you can have classic sites because you want to get rid of them for only 1 month. However, for, let's say here, for communication sites and team sites without a group, you want to put it to 3 months, for example. So really you can create multiple policies depending on template and also depending on the sensitivity label. So maybe all your sites with the Vlad Secure label, you don't want them included, or you want them to only expire after 6 months. You want to have a policy for those one in particular. Inactive sites policies with SharePoint Advanced Management allow you to do that. You can even filter by site creation source. So maybe the sites that users created themselves via the SharePoint home expire sooner than the ones that you created with PnP PowerShell. So you see, you even have that PnP PowerShell in here as an option to filter for your policy. And Do you want to include sites as well with retention policies or retention holds or not? From a policy, you can also include certain sites. You just need to add up to 100 sites that you want to exclude. So that is cool. Maybe you want to apply it to all your communication sites, but you want to make sure you exclude your intranet. Or let's say you have a board site that really, let's be honest, board members probably look at it every 3 months. You want to make sure that that doesn't get deleted after a month. You can exclude it, which is kind of cool. After that, who should you notify that the site has been inactive? I love that Microsoft added both site owners and site admins here. So the admin is the one you set inside the admin center is your site collection primary admin. Site owner is everybody that has owner permissions to the site. And what should you do after 3 notifications? So remember, 1 notification per month, 3 notifications. So after 3 months, if you kept spamming that user, that site is still inactive. Do you want to just do nothing and have it in a report? Or you can take an enforcement. You can put the site as read-only, or you can actually, you see right now it's not on in this tenant, but you can turn on Microsoft 365 archive. So you can put them into archived state. And we'll talk about that in 1 second here, but if I go to my Outlook here, you'll be able to see what does it look like. I had one here. So I get an email, action required, your SAM4 inactive sites needs attention. It has been inactive for more than a month. Do you want to certify site and tell everybody, tell the admin, hey, I know this has been inactive. There's a good reason why we're still using it. I want to certify it. Or if not, you don't have a button to, delete the site from the email, but it brings you to Microsoft Learn and it tells you how you can go and delete the site yourself, which is kind of cool. So those are the options that we have. But something that you might also want to do when a site becomes inactive is maybe trim some of the useless versions. Something that Microsoft added this year is enhanced admin controls over version storage. So if a site is inactive, maybe the project has been done. Do you really need to keep the last 500 versions of every single document there? It will add a ton of storage. And we all know that storage can cost quite a lot in Microsoft 365. So you can have the tenant setting, and you can also have a site-specific setting. So maybe for sites that you consider inactive, you can go and only keep the last 2 versions, or maybe the last version. And you can even apply it at the document library level, which is kind of cool. And you can go and trim existing versions if you want to. So you can have a default baseline and then go in, apply a more severe number of versions to your inactive sites and trim those version settings. And after that, if you don't want to delete the site, you still want to keep it just in case, but your storage is getting almost full, you can put it to Microsoft 365 Archive. It's a new feature. It has been released in GA at Build this year, and it allows you to keep SharePoint content at a lot more attractive cost. So instead of what is about 20 cents a gig to keep for storage in SharePoint Online, if ever you pass your pooled storage in SharePoint, you can keep it at only about 5 cents a month, which is good. And it still supports e-discovery, retention and DLP labels, sensitivity labels. You can even search in them. There's a few things you need to do, but you can search in them. They're excluded from Copilot by default, so no need to worry about that. But it really keeps the site as is, including the metadata. But make sure before you archive that you're not going to need that site anymore. Because look, yes, it's cheaper to put stuff into archive. It's 5 cents per gig per month instead of 20, which is the cost it would be to keep it active. But if ever you need to restore it, it's 60 cents per gig to restore data. So a lot more expensive. And Microsoft even has this nice fancy chart that they made in Excel, and they took a screenshot of it and put on Microsoft Learn. But to give you an example, if you archive sites and you restore 50% of them every month, it would cost you 75% more expensive than just keep them in active storage as a normal active SharePoint site. Just lock it or put it read-only. If even you restore from archive 80% of your sites every quarter, you're still going to be 5% more expensive. So be careful before you put stuff into archive. Trim down that storage as much as possible, because remember, you are billed per gig that you put in archive, and then make sure that you don't need it anymore. Maybe lock it, put it in read-only first before. This way you minimize the number of restores, and you don't pay Microsoft more money because they make enough. So this is it for my quick presentation. Sorry again for the voice. It's been, hopefully everything was clear and I was able to cover everything that you wanted. Please put in some questions, and while I take a sip of tea and take a look at your questions, I will let Nicolina come in and show you a quick demo on how provisioning can be done with Syskit Point.
Hello.
Nicolina, I'll let you share the screen here.
Of course. I hope that you can see it.
Yes, we can.
Perfect. And thank you, Vlad, for the great presentation. Despite your health issues, now enjoy your well-deserved break. And I will just explain, continuing with the same topic, on how you can use Syskit Point for workspace management from its creation to its end of life. Just before we start, to introduce myself, I'm Nicolina, and I'm Customer Success Manager here at Syskit. And for those new here, just to explain what Syskit Point is. Well, Syskit Point is visibility, security, and governance platform that gives you visibility over your inventory, helps to stay secure and compliant with the regulations, and it also has plenty of automated governance possibilities. As we said, topics for today is the workspace lifecycle, and I think it's very good described by this image. And following this image, I will explain how you can use Syskit Point to provision, maintain, and dispose the workspace. Let's start from the beginning, from the workspace creation part. Even before we request new workspace, here in the Syskit Point workspace inventory, you can check all of your existing company workspaces that, of course, admin would like to make available, and each end user can simply join to existing workspace or just submit request for approval, because we don't want to cause any sprawl and cluttering. If the needed workspace is not listed here, we can simply request a new one. We will just need to select the needed workspace type and choose any of the available templates. Then we are just following the requests that we have in our templates. And from the admin perspective, this is also quite easy, because for this we are going to use Syskit Point provisioning feature, where you can create those customized templates that we just saw. And basically, this is the main benefit of this structured and customized process. So you can pre-create different templates for different workspaces type. Here you can copy your existing data and structure from the existing source. You can enforce the privacy, enable sharing settings, attach sensitivity labels, any custom metadata, enforce naming convention, and you can attach any governance policy to the template. Also, we can make templates visibility based on different Entra ID properties, and there are also multi-step approvals. Once workspace is approved and created, we are entering the maintenance phase. And the best way to maintain the workspace is, of course, to use governance. Here in Syskit Point, we have multiple governance policies, but for now, we will focus only on so-called ownership policies. One of those, very important to maintain the workspace, is the orphan workspaces policy, where Syskit Point will immediately recognize all of the workspaces without active owners. And if the task delegation is enabled, it will send automated tasks for new owners' assignment. It's not just important to have one owner, but to have appropriate number of owners. And you can regulate that as well with our minimum and maximum number of owners policies. Also, when we are speaking about workspace maintenance, one of the most important policies is the access review. With access review, Syskit Point will send automated tasks to the workspace owners, asking them to check the membership and sharing inside of their workspaces. This is very important because you're asking the owners, the people who should know, who should have access to their data, just to check if that is really the case, because on this way you can just prevent some oversharing and data leakage. Once your policies are configured, you will need to apply them to your workspaces. And our recommendation for that is to use rule engine automation feature. So with the rule engine, you can create multiple rules based on different criteria like sharing settings, workspace type, number of guest users, any custom metadata, and Syskit Point will automatically attach the policy per those predefined rules. Using this automation, you are minimizing the risk, you are ensuring that the right policy is applied to the right workspace, which is tremendously important, especially in those large environments that you can manage with Syskit Point as well. Also, as Vlad mentioned, and what is very common when we are speaking about the workspace maintenance is the storage control. So with the Syskit Point storage feature, you can check your overall storage level. You can see potential storage savings by just deleting the unnecessary versions, either on a tenant level, or you can do that individually for each workspace. So let's check one workspace. Here you can see all of the files inside, number of versions of those files, and here you can also use different custom views. For example, you can check files without activity in some specific time period, and based on that, you can determine on which files you would like to remove some versions and save some storage. And the last part of our workspace lifecycle is the disposal. So when workspace is no longer needed, we will need to decide what to do with it. That's why we have the new policy that is called inactive workspaces. And here in Syskit Point, you can create multiple workspaces policies with different inactivity threshold periods. And again, by using our mentioned rule engine feature, you can apply the policy to different workspaces. Each time when Syskit Point violates this, recognize this threshold violation, it will send a task to the end users, resource owners, asking them to decide whether they would like to keep, archive, or delete. And with this, I will finish my presentation. If you like what you saw, and I hope you did, we are offering 21-day free trial that you can utilize immediately. Thank you all, and I hope, Vlad, that you are okay and that you will be able to answer some questions about this interesting topic.
Thank you so much for the great presentation. Okay, so we only have 2 questions in so far, so if there's any more that come in, please ask them now. I want to make sure we answer everything. So the first one is, our organization is planning a migration to Microsoft 365. What lifecycle management practices should we implement from the start to ensure a smooth deployment and future scalability? So if you're just planning the migration now is the perfect time to start thinking at those things because you can start from a clean slate. My recommendation is make sure you start small. Look at every site. Does it need to be a full Microsoft 365 group? Can you start it only as a SharePoint site and then you can groupify it later? So start small, start with only the things you need. Try to create your provisioning process right away. Maybe turn off the self-service one in Microsoft 365 and create your site request process right away. So this way, all the sites you have will have all that metadata that you need from the start. This will make your life cycle, especially towards the end, a lot easier. Configure things such as versioning in the admin center, because once you turn it on in the admin center, it will apply only to new libraries. So if you configure it before you migrate, all the new libraries will have those settings. So try to implement everything that we have talked about right away. Perfect time to do it. It will make a such healthier Microsoft 365 environment. And now, the second question is, our user base changes frequently with contractors and seasonal workers. What's the best way to automate onboarding and offboarding in Microsoft 365 to maintain security and efficiency? That is a question more on the identity side, but let's talk about it. Uh, Something that I recommend you do, especially if you have a lot of seasonal workers, is use Microsoft Entra ID entitlement management. Allows you to create access packages depending on a profile, depending on a type of user that expire automatically after a certain period of time. So this way, even if something gets forgotten, you forget to remove a user, it will get automatically done after maybe 1 month, 2 months, depending on your settings. And something that will be super important for you to do, and it was on the screen when we talked about inactive site policies, is uh, ownerless sites and groups, because a lot of the inactive sites emails will go to the site owners or site admins. But what if they were contractors or seasonal workers? It will go to nobody. So make sure you have those ownerless site policies in there. This way, every single site or group will have an owner you can contact to make sure that site is still active. We are almost at time here, and everybody has been silent. I know it's a short week with a lot of you from the US. Happy Thanksgiving in advance. So, since there are no more questions, I wanted to say a very big thank you to all of you for joining us today. I really hope you found it valuable, and looking forward to see you in our next webinar. Bye bye, everyone.